Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is well and thriving on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Here in the UK, it's 4 o'clock. Some of you, it's 5 o'clock, and some of you, it's 6 o'clock. Poor old Dana, it's what time is it? What time is
It's
it here?
eight. It's 8
8 o'clock. So
in the morning.
Dana's topped up with coffee and is raring to go. So for those who don't know me, my name's Will McIntee. I head up Companion here in the UK. And today we have a very, very exciting session. We have the one and only Dana Willmer from Partner Economics here to talk about the paths to partner profitability, the pathways to partner profitability. So Dana, maybe worth telling everybody a little bit about Partner Economics to provide some context before we kick off.
Sure. So, partner economics basically has three business activities. The first is research that informs the consulting work that we also do. That's kind of the second line of activity. And we're going to be sharing with you some of the results of our latest benchmarking study today, and also just what we're finding in the ecosystem as we work with partners and help them move towards more profitable businesses. And then the third part of our activity set is around mergers and acquisitions, so helping owners, exit the business if that's what they wish to do, or merge for future growth.
Very cool. Thank you for that quick background. And just to say to everybody attending today's call, we have a Q&A section, so keep those questions coming through. We'll probably save them to the end, where I will be the mouthpiece of the channel. So Dana's got a few slides to run through. I have no doubt that I will interrupt at some strategic points through his presentation, but I'm going to hand over to Dana now to walk us through today's agenda.
Great. Well, thanks, Will. I thought what we'd do today, just in having this conversation, is start with giving you a picture of what we see as the current state in terms of partner profitability in the ecosystem. And I want to talk a little bit about what we've called the hierarchy of margin. This is something that we came up with, a framework really for understanding, how you can build a P&L as a partner over time that has higher levels of profitability. So I want to just touch on that for quick context, and then share with you what we have found to be three distinct paths to partner profitability. This is what we're seeing in the ecosystem among those partners that are being the most profitable and the most successful. So three distinct pathways, if you will. And then also share with you the partner profiles underneath them, or how you would measure your success in terms of your progression along those roads to partner profitability, as well as help you understand which might be the best path for you. And then sort of close off with some suggestions in terms of where you might start getting on the whatever path is most appropriate for you to better profitability. So that's what I wanted to sort of run through with you today, and just sort of looking at where we see the ecosystem now. These are stats that we shared with those of you who would have been at Directions in Milan last October. That's our most recent sort of benchmarking results, and just some high-level stats here to maybe set the context. The first is that if we look at the overall revenue growth or turnover growth at a median level, it's 7.3. Now that's not bad, but it's not excellent either. And literally we see in the ecosystem partners that are growing their revenue at 20% or more, and partners that are not growing their revenue at all. So there's a wide range, but at a median level, the growth is just over 7%. Services to software ratio. So for every euro in or whatever your currency is in software you sell, on average, or rather at a median level, there's €1.50 in services sold. That number is dropping, by the way, for a number of reasons. I'm sure you're all experiencing that to some degree. We also measure the percent of revenue that is a partner's own IP, and it's a critical number for a reason I'll get into in a moment, but there's roughly 2.5% of total revenue coming from a partner's own IP. Software gross margins, just over 30%. Services gross margins, just over 33%. And both of those are under attack, or under compression, if you will. Such that the median level of EBITDA is 6.5%, and that frankly is not a very healthy number. Mm-hmm. You need it to be higher in order to fund the kind of growth and really be viable over the long term. So that's just some high level stats to kind of paint the frame.
So if we think about the EBITDA number there at 6.5%, where's that come down from?
Oh gosh, I mean, if we go back, a decade or more, it was invariably in double digits, right? I mean, 12, 15% was not uncommon in the good old days, let's say,
Yeah,
going back 10,
good
15
old.
years. So it's under compression. It's been falling steadily for the last while. Certainly, it's been falling for those who haven't made the transition to the cloud. I would say it's been falling for them most of all.
Okay, so basically, those that haven't shifted the business model are under the most pressure from mini EBITDA shrinking. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. As a general rule, yeah. Now let's just kind of I want to share with you again this framework, and some of you may have seen this slide before because we came up with it, I guess, about 7 or 8 years ago. Seems like an eternity ago now. In cloud years, that's probably, I don't know, a century or something.
Yeah, at least.
But the point of this really was to help partners understand how they could build a more profitable P&L. And if you look at it at a high level, pretty much any partner business model out there has some combination of the 4 revenue streams that you see there. So there's some level of product resale, there's some level of project services, there's some level of managed services, and there's some level of packaged IP. Now, not everybody has all of those, right? But everybody has some combination of those.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is that each of those revenue streams has certain inherent limitations in terms of the margins that you can drive out.
Yeah.
So if we think about product resale, I mean, at the moment, software margins, around 30%. But, we see pressure on that. And certainly if you look at the infrastructure side of the business, Office 365, Azure consumption, it's closer to 20%. It's going to over time, normalize down to that level, we feel, because, and this is the case for any software publisher, right? It's not just Microsoft. Any software publisher will find it hard to justify to their shareholders paying more than that for the simple act of reselling, software.
Yeah.
If we move up the food chain, to project services, this is really the mainstay, the core of the partner business model. And we're seeing, as I said a moment ago, a median level of 33% there in terms of margins. That's coming down. That's coming down steadily. And if we move to managed services, typically there's a higher margin associated with managed services. Frankly, because it's a little bit like selling insurance. In other words, think of this as support, and the customer really will pay for peace of mind, knowing that if they have an issue or if they want to talk to someone about it, they can, and they'll pay for that even if they don't use the support. It's like selling insurance, really. You tend to collect more in premiums than you pay out in claims, and for that reason, it's higher margin. But it's also importantly a recurring revenue stream, unlike project services, which are, you have ongoing projects and maybe you sell another project after the first year. But support typically and ideally is contracted. So it's a more reliable revenue stream as well as being a higher margin revenue stream.
And would it be fair to say that the majority of partners that participated in the benchmarking studies kind of fall into the project services and the managed services camp?
Yes. So everybody has project services. I mean, even ISVs will often have some level of project services, lower, of course, than if you're a VAR. So everybody has project services. And if we think about it, it's actually an interesting stat. If we think about managed services and look at the overall sort of, all the partners that participated in that benchmarking study, all up, managed services accounted for about 13% of total revenue, and that's actually up from around 9% pre-pandemic. So the good news is there's more partners monetizing that. There's an increasing number of partners monetizing that. Not everybody is doing that, but there's more of it. It would ideally be higher, of course, but at least that's a positive thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then if we sort of take the last pillar there of packaged IP, it's really the highest margin. It has the highest margin potential because effectively what you're doing is selling a product there, as opposed to product services and managed services requiring people to deliver, right?
Yeah.
Once you've packaged the IP, and you do that ideally by just really packaging up the expertise that you've gained from the projects you've done, as a Dynamics VAR, But every unit you sell of your own packaged IP doesn't have labor costs associated with it. So it's far higher margin for that reason. And it's also recurring if you sell it as a subscription.
Yeah, of course. And this is like the nirvana that we're seeing a number of our partners currently. Either some have actually arrived at this destination. We know that some are very, very aggressively moving towards this. But in your experience and from your perspective, what proportion of partners sit at the green end of this scale?
Yeah, great question. Unfortunately, far too few.
Yeah.
Again, if we look at the recent benchmarking study, the median level of own IP was 2.5%. And that's just not enough, unfortunately, to move the overall profitability dial. And it's actually really interesting, Will, because as I dig into the data, I found that there was something of a magic threshold at 10%.
Okay.
In other words, where I saw partners who were monetized, where 10% or more of their revenue was own IP, they almost always had, in fact, I can't think of a single case where they didn't have double-digit EBITDA, like 15% or more.
That's fascinating.
If I looked at partners that have like the 2.5% or 3%, their EBITDA was very, very often single digits, almost invariably. So it's a bit of a magic threshold at that 10% level. And obviously, the more the better, right? But unfortunately, far too few partners are successfully monetizing own IP is the bottom line.
Okay, that's great insight. And so basically, the message is, based upon the data that we've seen, transform, get above the magic 10%, magic 10% threshold.
Yep.
See double-digit EBITDA.
Yeah, and I want to be clear about something here, because a lot of times, what we hear from partners, or certainly have heard historically, is like, well, IP has never been our business, right? We're a services business. We can't become ISVs, and so, and I don't want to suggest, I don't want anybody to have the idea that you have to be an ISV in order to monetize your own IP. 10% of your revenue is not an ISV. And you don't have to spend a lot of money in developing your own IP either. Ideally, you don't. Ideally, you really just look at the projects that you've done and ask yourself a pretty simple question, which is what in the projects that I've done is repeatable?
Yeah,
what can I package up? Yeah. What can I package up and resell? And then, every proposal that you put out, you look to inject some of your own IP in that. Literally every deal you quote, has some of your own IP. That's the path to 10% or greater, quite frankly. Yeah, it's not spending a bunch of money on R&D.
That's very cool insight. And like if I think about some of the conversations I've had with partners, particularly new partners coming into the Business Central space, is it's very hard to differentiate your business by saying we're really good at doing Business Central, right?
Yeah. Yeah, especially when everybody is also saying we're really good, right? So, and everybody is, but not everybody can be best, obviously. Yeah. So that kind of understanding of different revenue streams and the fact that they have different levels of possibility in terms of margin is pretty important to constructing a P&L. And so here's what we're seeing in the ecosystem in terms of paths to profitability. There are really three paths that we have seen. Those who have been successful in building their profitability and in building businesses that are strong and growing. The first is, on the left, really just give your customers a compelling reason to buy, and that's monetizing your own IP, getting to that 10% threshold or more. It's not that you don't do services, by the way. It's not that you don't do project services. It's not that you don't do support or managed services. It's just that you focus, on doing that. Certainly, the services side of the business. You can't let that just not be a focus of your attention. But you focus on monetizing your own IP so that customers have a compelling reason to buy from you. That's your differentiation. The second sort of path is what we're calling share of wallet, or really it's just another way of saying capturing as much of the end customer's IT spend as you possibly can. So,
Yeah.
leverage your relationships with them to diversify into what we would call adjacencies. So it's things like making sure that they have, e-commerce solutions, for instance.
Mhm.
I mean, we've seen an explosive growth in e-commerce since the pandemic,
Of
obviously.
course.
There are partners building out businesses in analytics. There are partners that are, very strongly building out managed services business,
Mhm.
AI, machine learning, things like that. So,
Mhm.
so it's really just leveraging the relationships you have to sell more to each customer and capture more of their IT spend, as opposed to just sort of sticking narrowly to the ERP side of things.
Yeah.
And then the third path is really, if you're going to focus on services, you got to do it well. You just have to. And the intent there is to optimize your services profitability so that you don't rely on publisher margin to float the business. And
Mhm.
this is really what, a pure services business, think of an accounting firm or a legal firm. This
Yeah.
is what they've always done.
Mhm.
That's their business model. And as an interesting aside, I think it's interesting anyway, a lot of the partners that we find successful in really squeezing profitability, maximum profitability out of the services side of the business, in fact, come from the accounting sector.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree with that. I've seen that as well.
Yeah, they just bring that. Bring that model in.
So if we look at these pathways to profitability, these different paths to profitability,
Yeah,
a lot of partners, particularly, when I see some of the partners on today's call, a lot of partners have got a large install base.
yeah.
How much of an impact could a kind of like a cohesive, well thought out migration strategy have on a partner's pathway to profitability?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I mean, the short answer is it can have a big impact,
Mm.
but it's kind of a dual-edged sword, right? The devil's in the details. And it's
Yeah.
interesting, it's interesting and timely, because what I'm actually doing at the moment is updating the customer TCO model that we published a couple years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Now that sort of outlines the economics for a customer moving from on-prem to the cloud. And part of that, the flip side of that coin is the partner economic side of things. Not surprising given the name of the company. And here's the reality. The good news is that a partner in actively migrating their install base to the cloud will make more in the margins associated with the SaaS subscriptions than they will from collecting breadth. That's the good news.
Yeah.
The bad news is that they will lose over time the services revenue associated with periodic system upgrades and system replacements, right? So again, back to the hierarchy of margin, in order for it to both make sense to the customer so that the customer gets a lower TCO, total cost of ownership, and the partner gets a good profitability profile, a better profitability profile, we come back to the partner needing to monetize more support,
Yeah.
more managed services, and more of their packaged IP.
Yes.
And if they can do that, it's a win-win scenario. The customer gets a lower total cost of ownership, the partner gets better profitability. And candidly, Will, my belief is that the reason that as an ecosystem we haven't been as aggressive in migrating as we need to be is that we're just not monetizing at a partner level enough managed services and
I would, again, I guess I'm like yourself, lucky enough to speak to dozens, if not hundreds, of partners over a year. I think there is that almost that fear of treading into the unknown and migrating at scale, because what is that going to do to my bottom line? And for me, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is, I use the McDonald's analogy. Are you going to have fries with that? What additional services are you going to layer on top? Are you going to go big? Are you going to layer some IP on top of that? So I think, I think you've summed it up there beautifully. So when we kind of also look at the, again, these three different paths, in your perspective, what do you think the biggest hurdles that partners have to overcome to kind of like either choose a path or individual path or all three paths? What do you think the specific hurdles could be?
Yeah, great. So I would say, first of all, it's one of the three, not all of the three, because that'll be
That'd be
I,
chaos. Chaos.
that'll be chaos. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
never seen that work. You have to focus. So there's a couple of things, and I think there's a number of things. The first thing I think is mindset, right? At all levels in the company. This is not like transforming to a cloud focused business is not business as usual. It's a different model at all levels. So you have to have a mindset that says this is going to be something different. The second thing, frankly, is just inertia and getting out of your comfort zone. I mean, if you want to build something that's different, you have to do things that are different.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's human nature that we tend to do what we're used to doing and what we're comfortable with doing. And unfortunately, I don't want to get into cliches here, but if they say the definition of insanity is continuing to do what you've always done, hoping for a different outcome, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to work. So you have to get out of your comfort zone and do things differently. I'd say the third thing is a lack of a plan. I mean, if you want to do something, if you want to change the business model, you have to have a plan, for doing that. And if you don't have a plan, you'll end up nowhere, right? If you don't know where you're going, then every road leads you nowhere.
Yeah.
And the fourth thing is lack of funding, right? I mean, it's not free. And you have to be able to fund the transition. There is a cash flow trough between the old model and the new. I mean, that's been known for years, and you have to be able to ride out that trough. There's no point in getting halfway there and running out of money. And then the final thing I'd say is just in understanding which path is for you, right? Where your leverage is the greatest. Which one are you closest to? Which one can you get to the fastest? Is kind of the final thing as an obstacle.
Well, you use one of my favorite words that partners that know me know that I use far too often. My favorite word is focus. Focus, focus, focus. Which path is for you?
Yeah. Which path is for you? And actually, that's a pretty perfect segue, right? Because if we think about so what does a successful partner look like who has followed that pathway? How would you measure success? And these are actual partner profiles that I'll share with you. Obviously, not going to share more than the details that I am. But if we think about like the IP specialist or the one who's really focused on monetizing their own IP, this is a partner profile that we see having been successful. Actually, all three partner profiles that I'll share with you have EBITDA of 15% or greater. So if you're an IP specialist, you've got, over 60% of your revenue recurring, just under a third of it is SaaS-based. Your own IP is at or past the 10% magic threshold. Maybe I shouldn't call it magic, but it really surprised me when I saw that. This is interesting. Over 10%, double digit.
We all like the word magic. It makes us all think we're in Harry Potter land. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a magic wand though, unfortunately. That part of my Harry Potter kit is missing. Year-over-year growth is typically strong, 20, 25% or more. Gross software margin, pushing 40 points because of the presence of own IP. I want to be clear here, though, this business also has to keep its eye on the services ball. It's not like you can just focus on IP and not manage your services equation. And the services to software ratio is typically under 1-for-1. So you're selling more software, more of your own IP than you are other people's software, whether it's Microsoft or ISVs. And if we think in terms of what you have to focus on in order to get there, what are the keys to execution here, and what do you have to invest in? You have to be good at new customer acquisition. And you have to be good at sales automation. I mean, there's a partner we've done a lot of work with who adds nearly 70. They'll add over 70 new customers this year. Wow. Two salespeople. One of them is the owner. The owner, has they've got a very strong marketing engine, leveraging a lot of YouTube videos, for example, that has all kinds of inbound lead generation for them, which is low cost, and their sales process is almost fully automated. I mean, I'm sitting with the owner, numerous times, in fact, just recently. And he says, oh yeah, here's another lead coming in, right? And he shows me the email and says, yeah, and there's an automatic email that goes out and responds to it. It's just like he's not doing anything other than the lead is sort of managing itself, processing itself. And he'll step in when he needs to close the deal, or he'll pass it on to the other salesperson. But think about it for a moment: 70 new customer adds with 2 people in sales, right? And they also have a high own IP attach, right? So that's pretty straightforward in terms of the IP specialist.
Very cool numbers.
Yeah, and if we think about the spend capture specialist, now I've seen this business model be successful, even though candidly, when I would rather, I think that the services margin could be better here, right? So, but nonetheless, this is an actual profile, and it's EBITDA in excess of 15%. So really leaned heavily into the SaaS world, right? So over 3/4 of their revenue is recurring. Just under half of it is SaaS based. Not so much own IP because that's not been their focus. Still able to grow, strongly, 15%, not quite as high as the IP specialist, but still, a double digit as opposed to the median growth, which is less than roughly half that. Software margins, not the thing, right? Services margins at 35%. It could be higher. I would like to see it higher in a services to software ratio it's 0.5 to 1. So that's the spend capture specialist. And here's what they, did to get to that 15% plus EBITDA number. They're very good at cross sell. So they just mine they don't have the same number of customer adds as the IP specialists, but they're very good at cross sell. So they make sure that they capture every euro of the customer's IP spend that they possibly can. They attach services. They're monetizing a lot of their managed services, and they're doing that in a fairly low cost way. So they have relatively few bodies associated with the support that they provide. So they're really leaning into the managed services side of things, and they have low operating expenses as well. And candidly, if they didn't have low operating expenses, they wouldn't be as profitable as they are, right? So those are the keys to being a spend capture specialist.
Okay.
And then, sorry, Will.
So basically, spend capture specialist equals maximizing wallet share.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Maximize share of wallet. That's what it's all about. And then if we think of a services delivery specialist, we've got this is a services business, and you can tell that first of all just by the difference at the bottom there in terms of services to software ratio, right? So where the others are below 1 to 1. This particular partner profile has, €3.40 in services for every euro in software they sell. And as a consequence, because they're very much more focused on project services, only 17% of their revenue is actually recurring. And very little of it, under 6% is SaaS. Very little of it is their own IP. They're not growing as fast because, frankly, you can't scale a services-oriented business as fast as you can scale the other business models because there's just too much labor involved, and you can't manufacture people, especially now. They're not making really high margins on their software reselling, but they've got the services. Equation down, and they're generating 50% margins on their services business. So that's that partner profile. Again, 15% plus EBITDA. How do they get there? A couple of keys. Consultant-led selling. So they actually have no salespeople. This particular partner. Every consultant is a salesperson. Every consultant sells. And the other two keys are this is really the last two are the keys to a services margin that's approaching 50%, and that is they premium price their services. They're really good at value-based pricing, and they do the kind of work that they're in more of an upper market segment, than SMB for sure. And they're just rigorously managing their high utilization because their owner came from the accounting world, and he doesn't know any other business model. That's just the way it is.
So you mentioned something there about value-based pricing. Is that pricing based on outcome or pricing based on hour?
Outcome always. Outcome always. And it's a very interesting point, because if you price based on hours, you'll overprice some and underprice others, right? But mostly you'll overprice to the point where you won't sell much. Typically, that's at least our experience. It's based on outcomes, and in practice, I find this is a far more difficult. Maybe it seems pretty straightforward, right? You price on outcomes, but the challenge there is, well, what's the business value exactly that you're delivering to the customer? And because this is our business, we tend to think more in terms of technical outcomes than business outcomes. And it's actually, in practice, we've found more difficult. It's difficult to shift to understanding the business value you're delivering as opposed to technical value.
Yeah.
But that is absolutely key to premium pricing.
And it's interesting. I know that pricing model has landed reasonably well now in the US and Canada. We're starting to see it creep into different parts of Europe. But from my perspective as a former seller, I think that's a win-win to kind of like drive your margin. Now,
totally.
One of the things that I'm kind of one of the things I've always got in my head, bearing in mind the current climate, is that we have a capacity and capability challenge within the channel, and I'm looking at these models and I'm thinking, where does the cost of employee, where does the wage bill sit in these different models? Which is the highest and lowest, and how does the cost of employee work here?
Great question. And so if I look at if I think of this in terms of which business model is most reliant or most influenced by, in terms of its profitability, the cost of resources and the ability to get the resources in the first place. Broadly speaking, as you move from left to right, the dependency on resources increases, right? So the services delivery specialist, for sure, is the most exposed, if you will, to the cost of resources and the availability of resources, because their business is based on services. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got the IP specialist, who is, everybody's exposed to the cost of resources, right?
Yeah.
So, but as you move from left to right, the services delivery specialist is the most exposed, the IP specialist, the least exposed, but still exposed. And the spend capture specialist, somewhere in between, right? You still need resources, and you still need, relatively low cost resources. And, and unfortunately, we have to say that, in our latest study, one of the partners, it was either the first or second, main concern was, was availability of resources and cost of resources. And then when you ask the question, well, where are you getting those resources from? Most often it's other partners. So what we've done at an ecosystem level, unfortunately, is just raid each other's resource pool, and that does two things. It raises the cost, and it also does nothing to increase capacity, unfortunately.
Yeah, interesting. So one of so we're hearing a lot from Microsoft about Power Platform, and where does Power Platform feature in these models? Can partners create code rapidly in Power Apps, for example, to build additional vertical IP?
It's a great question, and we actually dived into this about a year ago now in some detail. And in principle, you would think yes. In practice, that's not what we're finding.
Interesting.
So in principle, it should work. In practice, it's not. I would say, if you think about partners that are really monetizing the Power Platform well and Power Apps well, invariably it's in upper market segments where there's business processes that have a lot of complexity, and you can justify relatively large projects to automate complex and manually based business processes. At the mid-market and SMB space in particular, we've seen partners try. We've not seen any succeed yet, unfortunately.
Interesting.
And there's a couple of reasons for that, I think. The first thing is that, and I don't want to be politically incorrect here, but I probably will be anyway. The Power Apps, or the Power Platform, Power Apps kind of built as a citizen developer tool. And in our experience, it's a citizen developer tool only if you live in a country where all the citizens are also developers.
Yes.
So in practice, you need development expertise to develop a viable and monetizable Power App. Otherwise, you paint yourself into a corner and you just can't scale it beyond a certain level, and you can't monetize it for that reason. Well, that's one reason. And those minimum team sizes in our experience, in order to just have the expertise you need to build a Power App that doesn't paint you into a corner where you can't monetize it because it won't scale, you're probably talking about 5 to 7 people. And in order for those 5 to 7 people to, be profitable, you have to sell, you have to develop it first of all, then you have to sell it. And you just haven't been able to do that. And a big part of that is, that there's no infrastructure aside from, or there needs to be more supporting infrastructure in terms of the development and the monetization side of things, like what you're doing at Companion in terms of the Cloud Partner Control Panel, for instance, right? I think that's a big missing piece here.
Yeah, and I think you raise a really good point there. For those of you guys on today's call that are looking to monetize Power Apps, make sure you spend a bit of time researching, speaking to your Companion partner, the success manager, about Cloud Partner Control Panel, because it's we think it can help with some of those numbers that Dana's just run through there. Thank you for that, Dana.
Yep, great. Okay, so we move to Q&A, in a second. But if I think about so where would you start as a partner to get on whatever your best path for partner profitability is? I think you have to look at what your current business model is. How is it configured? You have to give some consideration to what your addressable market is, and at the end of the day, you have to identify where your leverage is greatest. I mean, you want to get to the greatest possible level of profitability in the shortest amount of time with the least investment possible, and that requires understanding which partner profile you're closest to. And in our experience, to answer those first two questions, what's your business model and where's your leverage greatest? What we do, and we're happy to do this, with anyone who wants to. What we do is start with a benchmarking exercise. So, we take in individual partner data, and we come back to you with a discussion around where you sit relative to the ecosystem, more broadly, and that helps. That really identifies, which path is going to be the best for individual partner, as well as what the steps are that are necessary to get you on that path and towards the end outcome as fast as possible. And the starting point there, of course, would be for anyone who's interested in that to just contact your local Companion region representative.
Yeah, and I would say this is that the more partners that we have participating in the benchmarking study, the more benefit for everybody in the whole community of Dynamics partners. So you should see a handouts option there on your tabs. So I would just go in and have a look at the handout. In there, you'll find the Partner Economics Benchmarking Workshop. And I think it's one thing that's really worth pointing out is that, and if I remember this correctly, I think Tina's just prompted this question. Thank you, Tina. There is no cost to doing the benchmarking study, is there?
There's not. No, there's not. There's not. And the first part of our business activities that I mentioned, being research, we we don't. That's not something we charge for, right? We do this to first of all, develop an understanding of the ecosystem that allows us to be of the greatest use in the consulting work that we do. So, and building the database is always something that we're interested in doing because it gives everyone the best possible insights, and at an ecosystem level, just enables us all to move forward the fastest.
Yeah, that's very cool. So, so I think we're kind of now into the questions round. I can see that we've got a number of questions that have been published out. So I'm going to start with Javier. So what is the usual return on investment on the packaged IP investment with a 70% margin?
Oh boy. Yeah, it's a great question, and unfortunately, the answer is almost, well, it's a little bit like how long is a piece of string? So the return on investment, I've literally seen two polls, right? The first is if you're really doing it in the most low cost and effective way, and you're looking at your project base, and you're identifying bits of code that are repeatable with very little effort, right? Then the return on investment is almost instantaneous, frankly. If you're looking though, and I've seen partners make this mistake, if you're thinking about building out a bigger solution, right, that is like a full-blown industry solution, I've seen partners take years and commit millions of euros, millions of dollars to that effort, and be years before it starts to produce a return on investment. So again, it's looking at, start small, build out in increments, make sure you're addressing a market, including small chunks of your own IP in every proposal that you put out there, every piece of business you bid on. That's the way to get a good ROI the fastest. Yeah.
And I can see, Javier, you've got a follow-up question there, mate. And I'll answer this one, which is, do we see examples of EBITDA of greater than 20% with partners that have this business model? Well, put it this way. When I look at the UK partners, the two most profitable partners from EBITDA as a percentage of turnover are very much in this packaged IP space.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question. So we also have a question. I think it's from Austin, Texas. I think it's Brian.
Oh wow.
So can we talk a little bit more about the outcome-driven model for the service delivery? So I kind of rudely interrupted you earlier and said, "Ooh, so you're selling on outcome and not hours." Mm-hmm. Can you speak to any examples on that? I know I've got a couple which I could maybe speak about.
I'm trying to think now of specific examples. I mean, I've seen several different ways of getting at it, but basically, the process is take your technical hat off for a moment, put yourself in the customer's shoes, ask yourself what business impact you're able to have, and quantify that to the greatest degree you possibly can. And you could do that with, it just starts with an understanding of at an industry level or at a company level, what are the biggest businesses? What's keeping the executives awake at night? That's the starting point. And just apply yourself to solving that problem, whatever it is that keeps the executives awake at night.
Yeah. To talk at a little slightly more granular level, I mean, I've seen this very clever proposition from a partner that shall remain nameless, which is around accounts payable automation, which is when they talk about, okay, if we can automate, the processing of 10,000 invoices a month, that will save your business, 15,000, 20,000 a month. Therefore, this project will cost you 50,000 for the first year.
Yeah,
and I just love that. I mean, and actually, I've seen that simple message get sold again and again and again. Not having an argument about day rate, not having an argument about software cost, just having a conversation about, if we can do this for you, you will save this, therefore we will charge you that.
Absolutely.
I really do love that way of positioning. Sometimes, by the way, and again, just putting my sales trainer hat on again. Sometimes when you're kind of in a sales situation, you don't necessarily want to talk about hard ROIs. You want to talk about soft ROIs from a value perspective. Mm-hmm. So, increasing your competitiveness in the market, for example, is a great one to talk about if you can put a specific process around.
Yeah, and you've actually just you jogged my memory there. I would say there's a framework that I found particularly useful in terms of identifying business impact, and it's risk, cost, revenue. So if you think about it, you look at any business and any set of business processes, what risk can you strip out, and what is the quantifiable magnitude of that risk? Mm-hmm. What cost can you strip out? That was your example, I think, Will. And what revenue could you add, and what's the cost associated with that? And I actually have found that it's pretty much in that order, right? Because we're all as human beings, wired to avoid a penalty over pursuing a gain, right? So if you can identify a risk, even if you can identify the potential of a risk, that'll get people's attention, because nobody wants to expose themselves unnecessarily to risk. Mm-hmm. And that's just the start of the sales argument. And cost will work as well, but risk I found to be a particularly good lever to identify. If you can explain to somebody the risk that their business might be under. Mm-hmm. and propose something that takes that risk away, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, agreed. And Brian's just invited us over for barbecue in Texas. So get the beef brisket on. I'm there. Right. So
likewise.
Yeah. So guys, I'm just going to check if there's any more questions. I think we're coming to a natural end of our allotted time. So Dana, just leaves me to say thank you, mate. Thank you ever so much for giving up your time. My call to action for the companion partners on today's call, the not yet a companion partner on today's call, is have a look at download download the benchmarking study. Get in touch with us, and we'll and Dana, and we'll get your data uploaded, and you can spend a session with the giant brain of dynamics, known as Dana Willmer. So thanks, Dana, much appreciated. Looking forward to we should probably do another one of these, I reckon.
Always a pleasure, Will. Anytime.
Thank you, mate. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks for spending time with us. See you all soon.
Take care, everyone. Bye now.